going to be studying today two lessons. Lessons number 5 and 6. We are going to be learning everything in relation to the different dimensions of nature, which its characteristics are, who inhabits them. We'll also learn what methods we can use to visit those dimensions, also how we can get to have conscious and permanent presence in those dimensions, and we will find out where these dimensions are within ourselves. Because as outside, so inside. And if we want to access the higher dimensions of nature, we must learn to access and govern our own internal dimensions. Remember that if you have any comment or question, you can leave it in the comment section, and well, at the end we'll be answering your questions and solving any doubt you may have. So let's start by studying what a dimension is. A dimension is a level of consciousness. And when we talk about a level of consciousness, we are talking about a level of wisdom or a level of perception of reality. And according to our level of consciousness, it will be our perception of reality. So there are as many dimensions as levels of consciousness. Let's say that each one of us has a completely different level of consciousness. That is why a person perceives reality differently. A person with a high level of consciousness perceives reality in a completely different way than a person with a lower level of consciousness. What makes us unconscious and have a low perception of reality are our psychological defects or ego, since they have trapped our consciousness. Therefore, as we eliminate our egos with the work of psychological death, we will gradually eliminate materiality and will be releasing consciousness, which will increase our levels of perception of reality. All the dimensions are here and now. But is our level of consciousness what defines what dimension we can perceive? For example, there could be two people in the same room, one with a higher level of consciousness and the other one with a lower level of consciousness. These two people are not going to be perceiving the same, even though they are in the same place at the same time. We can see the dimensions externally as worlds parallel to this third dimension, and we can see them internally as the level of consciousness we have or the way we perceive reality. But the external and internal parts are completely related, because if I raise my level of consciousness, that immediately gives me access to higher dimensions in nature. Well, all the dimensions are synthesized in the 7 basic dimensions of nature that we are going to study today. We need to know that when our spark or consciousness emanated from that unmanifested God, or the absolute sun as we may also call it, and unfolded through these 7 dimensions, in each one of the unfoldings that the spark made, the number of laws and materiality increased. In the absolute sun, only the law of love governs. Therefore, there is only plenitude and happiness. But as the creation descends, the different dimensions appear. As we descend in the creation, each unfolding is heavier. Each dimension is governed by more and more laws, and therefore there are more and more limitations, more suffering, and more materiality. It descends from the zero to the grass. As the ego multiplies, these dimensions become heavier, and we fall into lower and lower levels of consciousness. So now let's look at each dimension in detail so we can understand all this much better. The first dimension is the length, or the distance between 2 points. Here we find all the distances or linear measurements, such as the meter, the kilometer, the rod, etc. The world that belongs to the first dimension is called Tritocosm, also known as hell. This is the world of all atoms. In this world inhabit all the species of monocerebrates, or creatures that have only one brain, which is the emotional one, like stones and minerals that, although we see them inert and believe that they have no life, they have a spark inside. They not only have life but are also capable of feeling likes and dislikes. We also find the bicerebrates that have also a motor instinctive sexual brain, but they don't have a backbone. Here we find insects, worms, and plants. These spineless monocerebrates and bicerebrates perceive the world in a linear way. Although we perceive them in a three-dimensional way, because a higher dimension can perceive a lower one, they do not perceive us in the same way. They see us as points at the end of their line of vision. The movement of the beings that inhabit this dimension is linear. That is, they only move from liking to disliking. They go from pain to pleasure and back to pain, like the plant that feels thirsty and is satisfied with water, or the insect that needs to reproduce and mates, or it is hungry and looks for food. And this is how its entire existence passes, going from one point to another. Within us, this dimension is located in our sexual glands, in our seminal system. There is our ego, and our ego also moves linearly, constantly going from pleasure to pain. The subdimensions of this first dimension go from 192 to 24,576 laws. So we can see that this can become really, really dense. So imagine the levels of materiality and pain that is perceived down there. Well, the second dimension is the surface, or the displacement of a line in space. In this dimension, we find all the bicerebrates beings that have two brains, the emotional brain and the motor instinctive sexual brain, but that also have a spinal column, like dogs, cats, birds, cows, etc., etc. They can feel like and dislike. They can move, reproduce, and instinctively record emotions. Therefore, they record sensations, and thanks to this, they develop, for example, fear and certain states of sadness. The beings that inhabit this dimension perceive reality in two dimensions. This is the world of 96 laws, and it is called limbo, or hole of hell. In this dimension, all the surfaces or surface measurements, such as the square meter, the square foot, the square vara, the square kilometer, the hectare, etc. We find all these measurements here. They are all the surfaces of things that are given by two dimensions, length by width or by height. We can see in the beings that inhabit this dimension how to satisfy their desires and needs. They can use ways that are not as direct as those used by those beings that inhabit the first dimension. We see how, for example, for one of these animals to reproduce, there can be even a kind of preamble or ritual. In this dimension, we find our personality and all our superficiality, the appearances of the volumes, the physical forms. So our personality does not allow our egos to manifest themselves in a direct way, but rather looks for the most appropriate and settled ways to let them manifest. These two dimensions, the first and the second, are our infra dimensions, because they are inferior to this third dimension in which our physical body is. In an upcoming conference, we are going to be detailing these infradimensions, conference number 9, and the work we have to do there with the psychological death in order to be able to inhabit the superior dimensions. Let us now see the third dimension, or dimension of the volume. Here we are going to find all the bodies or things with organic or inorganic physical presence, with 3 dimensions, which are length, width, and height. Therefore, here we find everything that has a volume. Here we find our physical body and all the measures that are cubic, like cubic meter, cubic centimeter, etc., etc. As we see, the 2 previous dimensions are contained in this dimension. And this third dimension, or physical world, inhabit all the bipeds or triceratops, rational animals, erroneously called men, with their 3 brains: the emotional, the motor, instinctive, sexual, and the intellectual brain. And since we have 3 brains, we can self-realize, humanizing and de-animalizing in one of our 108 existences as humans. So, in this stage, we have an intellectual brain that allows us to reflect on our own actions and judge ourselves. Also, we have an upright spine, which represents that stairway to heaven by which we can raise our sexual energy towards our higher centers to become human beings and achieve self-realization, the intimate self-realization of our being. This dimension, as we can see here, is governed by 48 laws, and its its importance lies in the fact that in this dimension we already have a physical body, which is a condenser of sexual energy, sexual creative energy, and we can transmute this sexual energy by sexually uniting with a partner of the opposite sex to create the existential bodies of the being, bodies that will allow us to have a presence in the superior dimensions of nature that we will talk about in a moment. It is important to point out that although our physical body moves in this third dimension, our psychology constantly inhabits the second and first dimensions, because we are constantly moved by our personality and by our ego. Every time a psychological defect manifests through us, it's taking us to the infradimension where he is living. But we are fully in this third dimension when we can stay focused by living in the present moment, in the here and now. But what our defects do is taking us out from the present moment to their psychological cave in the infradimensions. So it is very rare the time when we are really experiencing this third dimension, because we are always distracted by our egos and out of the present moment and out of the here and now. But the true inhabitants of this third dimension are those who have regenerated their physical body and already possess a solar physical body. Within us, as you can see here, this dimension is located in our sexual center, and it represents our earth element. Well, the fourth dimension is the dimension of time, and it is the duration of our physical body, or the duration of any volume, the time that elapses between the birth and the end of something. It may be a plant, a chair, an animal, us, etc. For example, we as human beings have an energy that covers us, which is our etheric part. It is our vital body, also subjected to the 48 laws of the physical world, because it is the upper part of our physical body. That is our fourth dimension, and well, our energy. And that energy determines the amount of time we are going to live. If due to the misuse of our internal energy, which is our water, our sexual energy, we have this etheric body or vital body very worn out at a young age. We will see ourselves worn out, old, and sick, because that fourth dimension, that vitality, has been wasted. Therefore, well, our useful life will be less than that of someone who has used his energy wisely. For example, when we fornicate, we take that energy and vitality out of our body. A person who repeatedly indulges in masturbation drains his vitality very quickly. There are also other activities that lead us to spend a lot of energy, such as doing extreme sports. Well, there is a huge expenditure of emotional energy that also affects our vitality. The requirement for us to manage this fourth dimension is that we begin to save our sexual energy, that we achieve chastity, that is the virtue of all those who learn not to waste their energy. Here, will consciously inhabit those who have already regenerated their vital body. This fourth dimension is that parallel world where the so-called jinas paradises exist, which are temples, cities, and places that were transferred to a higher dimension. Within us, this dimension is found in our instinctive center. Well, now let's look at the fifth dimension. This is the dimension of eternity. Here we also find time, but continuously, without beginning or end. That is why we find here the past, the present, and the future continuously. When we unfold into this fifth dimension, everything is handled in an eternal present, and we can see what happened a long time ago or what will happen in the future as if it were happening right now. This dimension is subdivided into two: the lower fifth dimension or astral world and the upper fifth dimension or mental world, with their corresponding bodies which handle different functions and have their own characteristics. In order for us to have a permanent and conscious presence in this dimension, we must create our astral body and our mental body. Right now, we only have a principle of the astral and mental bodies that allow us to unfold and make brief investigations in these dimensions. So now let's talk about each one of these worlds. The lower fifth dimension is the astral world. Within us, this lower fifth dimension or astral world is located, as you can see here, in our emotional center at the level of the navel on the spine. This dimension is governed only by 24 laws, half, as you can see, half the laws of the physical world. Therefore, there is less materiality here. Well, there are fewer limitations, of course, because remember that laws are conditioning and limitations. Here we move with the astral body, which is molecular in nature, not cellular like this physical body. For this reason, in the astral world, we can stretch a finger and it stretches, or we can, for example, go through walls. We can do things there that we cannot do in this physical world. This body manages our emotions, which is our fire, and it's related to the salamanders that are the elementals of fire. In order to create this astral body and have a permanent and conscious presence in this dimension, it is necessary, in addition to reaching chastity or using our sexual energy for this purpose, that we achieve total control of all our emotions. The upper fifth dimension or mental world is where beings who have already created their mental body consciously live. Therefore, you already have a full control over your mind and over your thoughts. This dimension is located at the level of the heart in the spine, as we can see here in the image. It is related to the earth element. It gives rise to our intellect and the way of thinking of each one of our atoms. In this world, we move using our mental body, and as this dimension is governed only by 12 laws, materiality and heaviness are less there. Therefore, well, there's a greater freedom and movement compared to the astral world, since we are limited there by half the laws than in the astral world. Now let's study the sixth dimension. This dimension is called the reality or the truth. Here we find what it is, what has been, and what will be. And this, like the previous one, is also subdivided into two parts. We have the lower sixth dimension or causal world and the upper sixth dimension or bodic world. Here we find the planets of the Christ and the electromagnetic worlds. In the lower sixth dimension, the causal world or world of conscious will, we find the body of will governed by 6 laws. Is of an electrical nature formed by all the electrons of our atoms. It represents our word or sexual creative energy and all creations. This is the world of causes. Here live all the beings who have created the 5 bodies that make them true men. Therefore, those who have already reached this point will have created their human soul. They are already real men, having develop the garments of the soul, which are those 5 existential bodies. The causal world within us is located at the level of the throat in the spinal column. The 6th superior dimension is the bodic world or world of consciousness. This world is what we could define as the heavens. It is governed by 6 laws and is magnetic in nature, made up of all the protons, which are the positive charge of atoms. In this world, we can already perceive what is reality or truth. Those who, having already created their human soul, which are the 5 previous bodies, have joined their divine soul or body and have achieved the so-called perfect matrimony or union between the human and the divine, have the right to inhabit this Buddhic world. This Buddhic body remains raised in all beings and waiting for them to develop their human soul, and it is our divine soul. Within this Buddhic world is found in the within us, the Buddhic world is found in the pituitary gland, which is in the brain at the point between the eyebrows. The last one is the 7th dimension. In this dimension, there are only 3 laws. Here is the world of light or the atmic world. Here we meet our inner being. The beings that inhabit this dimension are beings with 100% awakened consciousness, I mean enlightened beings. This dimension is known as the great truth or the great reality. This dimension is photon in nature. The photon is already light, which is wisdom. Within us, it is found in our pineal gland. This 7th dimension is the lowest that our being can reach, since it comes from the absolute, that is the world of antimatter. The atmic body is the Christic principle in each one of us. It is our particular warrior. The atmic body didn't fall either. It is raised in each one of us. So these are the 7 basic dimensions of nature. As we can see, as we go higher, the dimensions are lighter in nature, from cellular, then etheric, then molecular, atomic, electronic, protonic, and photonic. Let's see now what are the methods through which we can start visiting and knowing these higher dimensions from now on. As I said before, certainly we psychologically inhabit the infra dimensions. But we will have to learn to descend voluntarily since our ego is there. But it is also from there that the raw material and light and wisdom will come from to do this work. Voluntarily descending into our infra dimensions is done through reflective meditation and psychological death. Also, remember that we really perceive the third dimension when we begin to live in the present moment, the here and now. And to go from the third dimension to the fourth, the jhanas states is used. This is a practice through which we enter our psychological body to the fourth dimension. To go from the third dimension to the fifth, unfoldings are used. We'll use astral unfolding or astral projection to enter the inferior fifth dimension so we can investigate and corroborate many things. Many things and information and many other things. We can do many things there in order to advance in our inner work, as we studied in conference number 3. And to visit the superior fifth dimension, mental unfolding is used. We can use this practice, for example, to deepen more into our psychology and advance more regarding the dissolution of our ego. And to go from the third dimension to the sixth and seventh, transcendental meditation is used. In this dimension, also known as the heavens, we can experience true happiness and the reality. We can experience what is it like to live without the ego. The practice of these methods is necessary to be able to directly verify and know these dimensions. And we are going to be learning these practices along the course because this course, remember, is totally practical. Well, the most important thing is that we manage to have a permanent and conscious presence in the higher dimensions. And we will achieve this with the work on the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness. Psychological death, which allows us to liberate the consciousness and purify the sexual creative energy. Let us remember that this process consists of self-observation, then comes the judgment to those defects, and then the request for death to our Divine Mother for the defects and details discovered. The spiritual birth through the practice of suprasex, which allows us to create the existential bodies of the being, which are the vehicles that will allow us to have true and permanent presence and move at will in these dimensions. This is a practice of superior sex between a stable couple of the opposite sex, united in fidelity, chastity, and love. This practice was taught in lecture number 1 and will be taught again in lecture number 10. And the sacrifice for humanity, which allows us to egoize and awaken love, which it is the only law of the absolute. Okay, we practice sacrifice for humanity when we give this knowledge to others in a pure, free, and selfless way. So we must understand that it is not possible to ascend in the superior dimensions without eliminating the heavy and grotesque of our ego and personality. It is not possible also to have a real representation in a dimension without having created the corresponding body. We came to this planet Earth to self-realize and achieve full consciousness, and this is only possible by going down to the infra dimensions where 97% of our essence or consciousness is trapped by our ego. Therefore, without working on ourselves, it is not possible to awaken our consciousness or create anything. And well, this has been the topic for today. Thank you all very much for participating. I invite you, all of you, to join us in the next lecture, in which we will talk about the conjurations, which are protection spells in order to learn how to energetically clean our environment and protect the most valuable thing we have, which is our energy. So thank you very much, and see you all next time. The next conference will be on Thursday. So we'll be, as we did today, we'll be sending the link so you can access to the transmission. See you later.